Everybody, this is Brian Nimhauser, Hawk blogger, coming to you at home and ready for training camp to start. So looking forward to heading to camp tomorrow. Be the first day. Players reported today. They will have the practice tomorrow. Won't be a padded practice. They usually start with just shells and kind of get people ready and running through drills and all that good stuff. Expect it to be packed as it always is for all the practices now. I remember was not that many years ago that I would go there and there'd be a few hundred people, especially on a weekday. And the people that did go there half the time would leave early because they would get so bored. But it's packed now. It's a party. So I'm hoping to see some of you out there. If you see me, you know what I look like now. So definitely tap me on the shoulder. I'm always up on the berm. Easier to see there than in front of the fence or any of that kind of stuff. So a few things. Obviously, I'll get started on some things that are on my mind, but please feel free if you guys have questions, put them in there, and I'll start tackling those as I can. And if I miss your question, I will try to get back to it. Already got a question, Lazy B. So sleeper on offense. That's a good question. I could kind of cheat and say, Justin Britt. I don't think anyone has high expectations for him. And so if he's able to step in and perform at the center position and give the Seahawks a bigger, stronger center than they've had with Patrick Lewis and some of the other guys that they've had there, that could be a huge X factor for the offense. I think right now we're all braced for the fact that offensive line is going to struggle, especially early on. And we saw, with Drew Nowak last year, he really struggled, and the offense struggled as a result. Patrick Lewis stabilized it. Team isn't settling on him, so you have to think that they hope there's some upside there. What's going on with the fullback position? Fullback position, I think the team has been playing with this for a few years where they're not sure they want to carry a fullback on the roster, and I think this year is going to really stress that decision. So as I'm answering here, I'm just going to tell you guys again, probably going to have to re-ask some questions along the way because I won't be able to see them and answer them as I'm in the middle of a question. So feel free to resubmit. But I think that they're trying to get rid of the fullback as much as they can. I don't think it only plays maybe 20% of the snaps. Even when they had Michael Robinson on the roster, he was only 20 to 25% of the snaps. So I think you're going to look at a lot of H-back. I think Nick Vannett, you'll see him try to play some fullback. They used Zach Miller that way when he was here. And if they can steal a roster spot, great, because I have a feeling they're going to have a hard time cutting their running backs, even back to Zach Brooks. You got Procise, Brooks, Rawls, Michael, and Alex Collins. You're not going to keep all five, but I have a feeling they're going to really want to keep four of those guys, and that's going to stretch their roster. So we'll see how that plays out. Please go ahead and resubmit some questions. I saw some come in here. Who are some guys who can play their way onto the roster? I'll take the Russell Wilson winning MVP one this year first. The answer is yes. If you put a gun to my head, who's going to win MVP this year? I would say Russell Wilson. I think he's poised to do it. I think he's got the weapons. I think the offensive line's a wild card. A guy that could play himself onto the roster. It's a good question. I'll be better able to answer that after I watch a few practices. I could bullshit you, but honestly, I wrote today about a guy that's intriguing to me, which is Tanner McAvoy out of Wisconsin. He's a 6'6" safety, and nobody's talked about him. I'm shocked. I mean, as many Seahawks fans and pundits as there are out there, we've seen the Seahawks do a lot of crazy things and bring in a lot of different sized players. This would be the tallest safety in the history of the NFL. And he's just sitting there quietly on the roster. He's an undrafted free agent. He played quarterback and receiver in college. I think he even played cornerback in college as well. Super fast, super agile, and super tall. I think we could see him play a similar position that Brandon Browner is being asked to play. So could be interesting. Yes, and I could see them moving him to wide receiver. He was originally listed as a tight end. So I think they're trying to figure out what to do with him. He's a little like Jamison Cons from a few years ago. Someone just asked, I think, about Thorold Simon. I would tell you that he's my expected quote-unquote starter on the outside. I think Jeremy Lane starts there, but I think the team plays a lot of nickel and dime defense this year. When they're in nickel and dime, you're going to see Jeremy slide inside, and the edge corner could be Deshaun Shedd, could be Thorold Simon, could be potentially Marcus Burley, Stanley John Baptiste. There's a few guys that are kind of in the mix there. I like Thorold Simon. I think that guy. Something about him, I feel like he's going to be a Pro Bowler this year. I can't say I have good reason for that. It's just a gut I've got about what his potential is, and if he's fully healthy finally, he's just a physical talent, and I think he's really ready. I hear there's a question about where Michael Bennett is. Folks, I don't know. I have a feeling he's not going to be there. I'll just come out and say that. I have a feeling he won't be there tomorrow. I think there's starting to be some rumors on Twitter about where he is and that kind of thing, and we'll find out. But I don't expect him to get a new contract. I think we would have heard about it by now if he was going to. So brace for impact. He might be out a few days, but he doesn't have much of an option other than to report eventually. So, I'm more concerned about whether he really is going to be here the way he was last year and committed to the cause. So that's just my guess. We'll see. Maybe he's already here and happy. We'll find out. Let's see. So there was a question that someone else just asked me and I missed it. See here, so I potentially see Bennett being traded. Maybe. I think that would have happened during the off season as well. There's some conversations I had with a few folks off the record about Joe Thomas and whether that was potentially a target and whether you'd move a Michael Bennett or even a Cam Chancellor before he kind of had his turnaround with his attitude. And that didn't happen for various reasons, but I think they're gonna hold on to him, and that would be my expectation. Brandon Browner, one of my all-time favorite Seahawks. So I'm definitely biased. I want to say yes, he's going to make the team because I really hope he does. I love watching him play. I love the idea of how they're planning on using him inside a little bit more as a safety. The guy just adds so much intensity and physicality and attitude and swagger to that defense. I just think he kind of completes that group. And I think when he and Cam and Earl and Richard are all there, I know we've continued to talk about the LOB even after Browner left, but it really felt like it stopped being the LOB when he left. So I'm hoping he sticks around. I'm hoping it works out. Question here about whether Hunt wins the center job, or if he wins the center job, do we keep Lewis and Britt? I don't think so is my first response. I think there's a potential they're looking for the reason to not have Lewis on the roster, which is a crazy thing to say considering he seemed to really stabilize the line last year and definitely was the best center that they played. But they're not going to keep all three of those guys necessarily on the active roster. I'd have to go through and do some roster math to be totally sure about that. But, Hunt is just a center. He's not a guard. I don't think he could swing out to guard. Lewis can play guard, but he's really a center. Britt obviously can play all three. So, it's hard for me to say all three of them would make it. There's the question about the tight end. Thank you. Odd man out at the tight end position. I think Cooper Helfet is your answer there. I think he'll be the odd man out. If Poole could win swing tackle, Hunt could center, we could cut Britt. I know everybody wants to get rid of Justin Britt. I have to be honest, folks. I was really hard on him from the get-go, not intentionally, but I watched these training camps and watched the 1v1 pass rush drills, and he was a disaster from the get-go in pass protection, way more than almost anybody else, and that's proven to be true. And I found that drill to be pretty indicative of what you're going to see in pass protection over the years. But having said all that, I think he was a serviceable right guard. He started for a Super Bowl team at right guard. He played all 16 games. I think he was not a great, sorry, right tackle. Did I say guard? Right tackle. He was a serviceable right tackle. I think he was a real problem at left guard. I would have thought he would have been better with some people around him, but he just really struggled to get his hands on people. I don't know if he's going to be any better at center, but I'm hoping he is. I'm hoping he is because physically he's got higher upside than some of the other guys. So we should all be cheering for him and hope that he finds his way. I haven't seen enough of Tyvis Powell to say, so I'm going to leave that. I'm not going to be able to answer that question with confidence. Procise, boom or bust. If those are my only two choices, I'd go with boom. But I think that he's getting a lot of hype and already missed some time with injury. And this guy I want to see on the field. I want to see him doing it. And he was a wide receiver in college mostly. He transitioned well to running back, but this is the NFL, and as much as we like the idea, how it works out in practice could be very different, especially in pass protection. So if he's going to be a third down back, he's got to get that down pat, and most rookie running backs struggle. Who do I think the best team is in the NFC West? I have a feeling that's the Seahawks. Homer or not. Vegas would agree with me. A lot of folks would. I think this is the best team in the NFL, not just in the NFC West. I think it's just a matter of whether they stay healthy and, I can get off to a better start this year. I think that the schedule is balanced and challenging throughout, but not impossible. And one thing that I'm going to be watching for is, have they figured out how to start better, not just for the season, but for games? I think it's an important area for growth for the Seahawks and for Pete Carroll to actually put focus on it. A couple questions about Trevon Boykin, QB2. Again, I have to see him before I give you too much on my real opinion on him. I have some trepidation about a guy that's already got in trouble with the law again and is a pretty raw thrower. I mean, I watched him in college, and I think he's got some upside, but I'm more interested in seeing, and I think the Seahawks are probably going to be more interested in seeing if a vet gets cut from another team later in camp, and I think they'll probably add someone like that, and Boykin would probably be a practice squad player. Reminds me a little bit of Josh Portis from a few years ago in terms of raw talent, maybe a little bit more refined than Portis, but not necessarily someone you're gonna keep. There was just a question about Arizona, and I missed it, so sorry about that. I think one of the really interesting things is going to be how Darrell Bevell is going to adapt to the offense this year. I think you've got some unique players, especially at the running back position. You've got C.J. Procise. You've got Zach Brooks, depending on whether he makes it. You've got Alex Collins. They all have different strengths. And then Paul Richardson's a good question here. He's got speed that they haven't had. You got Tyler Lockett. There's some really interesting Nick Vannett. Jimmy Graham, if he really is coming back to start the season, which is stellar. I mean, not patellar, it's stellar. I mean, that's amazing if he's really coming back that quickly. I think Darrell Bevell's got a lot of options, and how he uses them is going to be interesting. When he had Percy Harvin to start the 2014 season after the Super Bowl, you saw the whole offense shifted around him, and it was not a good idea. And I think the Seahawks took a step backwards as a result. With all these pieces, you want Bevell to augment the offense and have it take a step forward, but you don't want to see, all of a sudden the offense not look like itself. And there could be some temptation to do that with Marshawn Lynch retired. Maybe they start looking very different, and I don't think they need to. They didn't have a lot of these guys for the last half of last year, including Jimmy Graham, and that offense was fantastic. So, I want to see tweaks. I want to see clever emphasis of people's strengths. Question on whether we improve the pass rush enough. You can never improve the pass rush enough. Pass rush is, you know, it's a bottomless pit. You could have every guy on defense be a great pass rusher, and it's not enough. Related to the question I just saw about Frank Clark, I rated him as my top Seahawk under 25 years old. I did a top 5 under 25. Tyler Lockett's the obvious choice there. Was a Pro Bowler as a rookie, made a huge impact, was great as a returner, was great as a receiver, should continue to blossom. But I'll tell you, folks, Tyler Lockett could be a great receiver. And if Frank Clark becomes a very good pass rusher, he's more valuable. So I think Frank Clark can be a guy that wouldn't, I think the minimum I'm hoping for Frank Clark this year is 7 sacks. If he's under 7 sacks this year, I'll be disappointed. If he gets, over 9 or over, then, that's huge. Huge. There's not many players the Seahawks have drafted that have done that. Now, I think there's a question about Brandon Cottom. I've talked to him actually a few times, and a good guy. He's willing to play wherever they want. They had him at fullback last year. They're talking about tight end. I don't know that it makes sense for him to be at tight end. I think he's clearly would be a blocking tight end. I think fullback would be a natural fit for him, but we'll see. That's one to watch as camp goes on. So who will be? God, there are a lot of questions about fullback. Funny. I don't think we know on fullback. So, going in, there's one guy that's related to the fullback position. I'll go off on a little segue here, but Brandon Bryant, Florida Atlantic, defensive tackle in college, huge pass rusher. Actually, if you look at his physical measurables, he is very similar to Robert Nkemdiche, and actually better in a lot of numbers physically than Nkemdiche, who was drafted in the first round by the Cardinals. Now, they brought him in supposedly to actually play fullback, 290-pound fullback, which would be pretty cool. But I've gotten some buzz that he was impressive enough that they're going to keep him at defensive tackle. So he's a guy that I'm really interested to see how he performs on the field, especially when they get pads on. But this could be another Schneider find, pass rusher, defensive tackle inside. If he really shows, if he's the physical freak he seems to be, and he can fit along the defensive line, that could be fantastic. So that's a guy I'm really looking forward to seeing. Sam linebacker. Great question there. So you've got Mike Morgan, Cassius Marsh, Eric Pinkins, Kevin Pierre-Louis. I don't really think there is others. I have a feeling that Mike Morgan will clearly start the camp as the number one. I think the team would love to see someone else win that job because Morgan is on the older side. He's not old, but he's on the older side, and his upside's pretty limited. They know what they have in him. I think Cassius Marsh would be an interesting one. It'd be nice to find a role for that guy. They started a defensive tackle with him as a rookie. They moved him more to the defensive end last year, and he just hasn't found his pass rush. So I think a lot of people are disappointed and think he's trash. I don't think that's the case. He's actually played really well against the run. Strong, shown some ability in space even to make tackles. So I think the Sam linebacker spot, which is a first and second down base defense position, it's not on the field all the time. I think he could do that. So I'm kind of eager to see that. Kevin Pierre-Louis is a total wild card. I don't think anybody knows. He doesn't have an obvious spot. I think they're putting him there because they'd like to see if he can find a way onto the field. I think he could also be some competition for Brock Coyle as a backup middle linebacker. We'll kind of see what happens with KPL because guy's clearly got talent. He just hasn't capitalized on it yet. I'll have to get back to you on the undrafted free agent pass rusher. My first response is Brandon Bryant because that's the guy that's on my mind. I want to see what he can do. If Rawls can't go, then I think you're going to see Christian Michael as the starter. And nobody's going to tell you that other than me. Not because I'm super high on Christian Michael, but because um, I think the team, the way the decisions they've made in the past, they want someone who knows the offense. They want someone who they can count on. It's a pretty important position. And so if they don't have Rawls, who's someone who's got some experience there, and they don't have other vets, Michael would be the guy. I've also heard from guys inside, not just players, but front office folks, that Christian Michael's been super impressive during the offseason. Really impressed a lot of people and have been working hard, playing well. He's been the number one. So, um, you know, that would be the guy I would go with. I think Alex Collins is clearly the one that you hope could grow into the alternate starter at running back. Fumbling is going to be an issue. So as talented as he is, if he's fumbling the ball, he's not going to see the field. Um, I did not see Arians' shot at the Seahawks offensive line. I'd love to hear it, so let me know what he said. Sokoli, good question. He's a guy that's kind of was hyped and has kind of snuck back into the behind the scenes. I don't know that no one's talking about him at center right now. That was all the talk last year. The team mentioned him. They were really excited about him. Don't know. I have to say he was worse than Justin Britt as a pass blocker in 1v1 drills when I saw it, so I feel like he's got a long way to go. I saw a couple questions on Casey Williams, so let me touch on him for a second. Casey Williams is, I think, a super talented athlete. Even last year in camp, what I started seeing in special teams made me really encouraged by what he might be able to do as a punt blocker, on the edge, a punt rusher. And I think he also has some potential as a gunner on punt coverage. And I'm basically stopping with special teams because he's not going to have a role unless he can find out how he figures out, to fit in and excel on special teams. Can't stress that enough for a guy like Casey Williams. Now, if he can find a role on special teams, then you've got a guy who I think is the best high point receiver that's likely to make the team. Kenny Lawler is a guy that a lot of people are excited about. That's fine. He's going to have a tough road to hoe. There's a lot of guys ahead of him, and he's going to have to just own it to really leapfrog Kevin Smith and Casey Williams and I'm forgetting some other folks. There's a number of folks on that list, but I've been writing Paul Richardson. He's a number 4, but there's a lot of guys there. I did hear something about the wide receiver they signed today. Had like 4.38 speed, so I think that's part of what they signed him for. Got excited about what was going on there. I think the Panthers question is an interesting one. I think a lot of people are looking at the Panthers and expecting them to fall back a decent amount. Not so sure. I mean, they lost Charles Tillman and Josh Norman, who I think that's a big deal, and they played a huge role in the way that team played. I think that I have a lot of respect for that team. I think they were a really good team last year. I think they proved they were better than the Seahawks when it counted. We can debate that. I understand what people would argue potentially, but that defensive line really wreaked havoc with the Seahawks offensive line and exposed them on the road. And Cam Newton did. He evolved. I don't like the guy as a player. I don't like his attitude. I don't like the way he carries himself as a leader. I definitely don't cheer for him. I just love cheering against him. But he played like an MVP. He did everything necessary to win that award. He absolutely earned that. So difference between disliking a player and not respecting them. So I think that team has reason to expect that they're going to be a force again. I will tell you that teams that lose the Super Bowl do not return to the Super Bowl the next year. It just doesn't happen. So that really works against them. How much it works against them, we'll find out. Now, someone mentioned something about Douglas McNeil. Let's talk about him for a second. So McNeil last training camp was a star. He was making great catches every practice. He was one of my early camp standouts. 6'3", good downfield target. Actually, even good as a crossing route guy. He was catching the ball and run after the catch was really nice. Then they decided, I think they saw the numbers and saw he just wasn't going to make it as a receiver, so they swapped him over to cornerback. And so this poor kid had to try to play cornerback in the middle of camp. And I'll tell you something, that takes balls. Like, he will do anything to make it in the NFL. I think he proved that. A lot of players would be too prideful to basically get into a training camp and be willing to play a position that's not something they play at a pro level, and go up against pro quality receivers. And he struggled. Richard Sherman was there to help him. I think that he didn't make the roster. He didn't make the practice squad, but he's been in and around the team. So, I think it's going to be interesting. I've heard some good things about, how people see him in that locker room, and there's people pulling for him. So don't count him out at all. Now, someone asked me if Jimmy Graham over under 8 touchdowns. I think I remember that from a while ago. I'm going to go under. 8 touchdowns is a lot. I think that's a good over-under. I think he could get up to 8. But I just have to see him on the field and healthy before I really start believing he's going to have a banner year. The only thing that gives me pause about thinking that maybe he could be over and go big is I have a feeling Russell Wilson's going to figure it out this year with how to utilize him and how to use him as a red zone target. And, look, he figured it out with Doug Baldwin last year, and look what happened. If you can figure that out with a guy that's 6'7", that led the NFL in red zone touchdowns, 3 years before coming to Seattle, then, he's going to get a lot of touchdowns. So not out of the question that Jimmy Graham goes over 8 touchdowns. Luke Wilson. So Luke Wilson's going to have the same role. I mean, he's an inline tight end for them, and I think that he'll be challenged for snaps a little bit with Nick Vannett, because I think Vannett, they're hoping, is a better blocker. I'm going to watch and see if that actually is true once the pads get on. There's actually been really mixed reports about whether Vannett is a good blocker or not. The Seahawks, I'll talk about him. The coaches, he is a guy that they want to be that kind of blocking tight end. But the people that actually know Vannett from college, talk about him as a receiving tight end and not as a blocker. So that's going to be an interesting one to watch and find out what the truth actually is. Meanwhile, Luke Wilson's he's just solid. I mean, he can be your starter and do a little bit of everything. I don't think he's spectacular at anything, but he's a tough guy. He's got good hands, and he is an okay movement blocker. He's not great as an inline blocker to take on and engage somebody right at the point. I think he gets overpowered, but you'll see them put him in motion, and if he's in motion like that, he can crack down on somebody. He's willing. He's definitely willing, and he's strong, but it's just not his forte, so to speak. So, Diesel Foo, what do I think of John Ryan? I think that they should have spent their money elsewhere. I love John Ryan. I just think that they have needs on the offensive line, and I would have liked to see them go with a young player, a young punter, go as cheap as possible at punter, and spend that money on the offensive line. That's what I would have liked to have seen. I'll say that I felt the same way about Jermaine Kearse. I love Jermaine Kearse. I love what he's done for the Seahawks. I'm happy he's on the Seahawks, but if it was up to me, I would have taken the money they spent on him, and I would have spent it on an offensive lineman. I think that there were some really quality veteran options that were not that expensive. The Seahawks chose not to go for. They went young in the draft. I think it would have been, to me, ideal if they had sprinkled in some quality veterans with young players. And what they will tell you is that's what they did. They got Jamarcus Webb and, Bradley Sowell. And I got to tell you, Jamarcus Webb was, we could say whatever we want about Pro Football Focus. I totally agree that its ratings are crazy, and on the offensive line is probably the worst of their ability to rate things because they don't know the assignments and all that kind of stuff. But Jamarcus Webb was dead last as an offensive lineman, as a guard for them. Bradley Sowell, when he started at left tackle for the Cardinals a few years ago, dead last in the NFL as a tackle. So I have trouble, and we've seen in past years in those ratings, Justin Britt was pretty low. It's not all wrong. I mean, there's some truth to it. So to say that if you've got Jamarcus Webb and Bradley Sowell at the bottom of those ratings, and two teams that were happy to move on from these guys, if it was any other position, I would be like, Seahawks know what they're doing. They always do. Other teams move on. Seahawks know when they go in and they use them the right way. Offensive line, we've seen this time and again. They bring in guys that maybe are decent as run blockers, but just struggle in pass protection. It's like I've written about it multiple times. It's a blind spot. Tom Cable's never had an offensive line that ranked higher than 25th or 26th in sack rate since he's been in the NFL. Over a decade. So, yeah, it's just based off of history. It's hard for me to come in and say I'm super confident that Jamarcus Webb is going to be able to lock down that right side. Now, I feel like I should clarify. Well, why should they fire Cable? No, I don't think so. I think Tom Cable is one of the best line coaches in the NFL. I absolutely believe that. I think that he struggles in putting lines together that can pass protect. I don't think he puts a priority on that. But running is Pete Carroll's number one priority. And the Seahawks have been the number one or number two or number three rushing team pretty much every year Cable's been here. And it's not just when he's been here. Cable's put some of the best running teams together in the NFL since he's been in the NFL. He's consistent about that. So I think people forget because they see Russell Wilson running for his life, and they're like, this is Cable's fault. He sucks. And to some extent, that's true, that it is his responsibility, but they forget the fact that Marshawn Lynch, and a bunch of these other guys, they get all the credit, but that's Tom Cable too. Marshawn Lynch wasn't doing crap in Seattle. He was averaging 3 yards a carry before he finally went to Tom Cable and said, okay, what do I need to do? And Tom Cable said, this is what you need to do. And he was never the same after that. He took off. So you just can't discount how important it is to have a great running game. It's a key part of what makes Russell the player he is. So, there's not some other offensive line coach who I can't wait to get in the door who's going to change everything for the better. And honestly, to have some fantastic pass-protecting offensive line when you're likely going to have even run-to-pass ratio no matter who you have at quarterback, I'd rather have a great running offensive line, and I just wish that they'd figure out how to develop a good pass-protecting offensive line. And I think we'll just have to see. Can I see us developing into a dynasty like the Patriots? Yeah, I mean, I've written a lot about dynasties. I've done a lot of research on dynasties. I think the Seahawks, they were a play away from getting their second Super Bowl, and my whole thought was 3 Super Bowls in 4 years was what I had in mind. I think they have a chance of definitely getting to 3 Super Bowls in 4 years and maybe winning 2 of them if they make it and win it this year. But 3 and 4 was what I was kind of hoping for. I think now you kind of look at it and you say over the next 3 years, can they win 2? And if they can do that, then yeah, they're in the dynasty range. And I think now with Pete Carroll locked up, I mean, hallelujah, Pete Carroll locked up, John Schneider locked up. They're going to go in and they're going to recharge. This rookie class is so important. Not only this rookie class, but the development of last year's. Let's see what happens with a guy like Tyler Lockett. How good can he be? How good can Frank Clark be? There's even other guys in that class, and I wish I was sitting at my computer and I could go over and look, but Ty Smith, that's a great call out. Ty Smith's another one. He was one of the cornerbacks I was trying to remember. He's a sleeper. I talked to Ty over the summer and or sorry, over the what would it have been, the spring, and he's ready. He feels like he's ready. He thinks he's going to burst onto the scene. We'll see. They kept him around for a reason. Generally, when they do that, they see something in him. So we'll have to see. So a lot of this talk about the Broncos' defense being better than ours. Honestly, it's just not true. I think it's in the range. The numbers that, at least as I look at them, in terms of how they stood out relative to the season that they played in, they don't hold up. I wrote an article. If you want, you can go and look on my blog. Look for Seahawks Broncos best defense, and I've got statistics, to back it up. Why the 13 Broncos defense was the best defense in the NFL last year, even though the Seahawks led the NFL in points allowed. I think the Broncos defense was definitely the best defense in the NFL, but they weren't better than the 13 Seahawks defense. Just the numbers don't hold up. Thank you. Glad you read the article. I appreciate it. I hope you guys are liking the new site as much as possible. I have to admit it's been a painful transition. It's a little more work on my side and doesn't always agree with me. It doesn't always work as well as I want. So I'm hoping it's working okay for you guys. Goff and Gurley. I think Gurley will stay healthy. I don't know with Jared Goff. I like him. I think that the Rams are in good position there. I'm kind of hopeful that we get the Rams at the right time, that second week of the season. It's their home opener in LA, which will be a lot of hoopla, and that'll be tough. But I like rookie quarterbacks. I don't care who they are. I like rookie quarterbacks, especially against this defense. So I think that's good. One of the undertold, stories about the beginning of this season is the quality of the defensive lines that the Seahawks offensive line is going to face right out of the gates. Miami at home, obviously the Seahawks are going to be favored. I think they're up by 9 points now. Last I checked, it's kind of been creeping up over time. But you've got Cameron Wake, you've got Ndamukong Suh, you've got Mario Williams for whatever you think of him. So I think you've got some pretty good defensive linemen coming the first week of the season to challenge that O-line. You also have got the Rams defensive line the second week of the season. I am spacing on who we play in the third week, but then we go to the Jets for the fourth week, and you've got that crew, which is one of the best defensive lines in the NFL. So we're going to learn a lot about the offensive line in the first 4 games. And if you come out of those 4 games and you're 3-1, 4-0, something like that, watch out. I will tell you that I think you're right. I think it is 49ers week 3. I'm not positive, but that might be true. They've got a decent defensive line too. You're going to hear Pete Carroll talk about it. It doesn't matter how you start, it's how you finish. And that people also will tell you that the Seahawks always start slow to start the season, that they lose and they have a big finish. Guess what? There's a season where they didn't start slow. The season happened to be 2013. They started fast out of the gates, and they ended up at 13-3. It matters how you start. And I would love, I've been writing about it, I wrote it at the end of last season, I would love him to, amend his motto to, it's how you start and how you finish. Because, I think I'd like to see him start talking about how you set up the finish. And I see it bleeding into the way that they start seasons. I see it bleeding into the way they start games. In particular, we've seen it in the playoffs. And this team has such amazing resolve. I mean, what they did against the Packers 2 years ago was unreal. What they did against the Falcons 4 years ago was unreal. What they did against the Panthers last year, all these things in the playoffs at crunch time, unreal comebacks. So this team is gritty and they can come back from almost any deficit. What would they be like if they were ahead? What would they be like if they could actually give themselves at least an even start as opposed to being, a really slow start. So I do think it's important, and it's something I'm going to kind of write about and ask about, and hope that some other people ask Pete and the players about. Someone asked about preseason, whether undefeated in 2013. They were. I think they actually had an undefeated streak in preseason that ended in 2014. Honestly, preseason undefeated streaks are more about how much depth you have than anything else. And the Seahawks were so deep for a while. It could happen this year. I just distinctly remember watching that 2014 preseason and being like, "Oh shit! Like this defense, this team is just not as deep as it was. It was thinner, and turned out that was true. And I'm not sure they fully recovered until hopefully this year. They've got a lot of depth, a lot of promise, and we'll see how that goes. A couple tips for anyone who's going to training camp. I'll give this just to people on Periscope, but obviously you want to get there early, find your place that you want to be. I will tell you, everyone tries to get right up close to the field. I don't advise it because you just can't see nearly as well. Now, if you really want to get an autograph and that's the main thing you care about, sure, get on the fence, get there as quickly as possible, be as close to that as possible. If you actually want to see what's going on, it's actually better to be high on the berm. So don't feel like you got to crowd down as close as you can because people are going to stand, they're going to be walking in front of you. Players are standing and you're going to want to see over across the field. That's a big thing. I'll tell you another tip that a lot of people don't know. First thing you do when you get to training camp and you walk around the corner and get to the top of the berm, look to see where there are light standards. You'll see these big, what are they called? The cherry pickers, where the guys are up and they have the cameras where they're going to shoot, record practice. And you want to find where the cherry pickers are because that's the field they're going to use. There's actually 3 fields in the VMAC, and sometimes they do the side field. And if they do the side field, what's going to happen is everyone's going to be lining up on the berm and saving seats, and then people are going to realize that the practice is on the side field. Everyone's going to run over there, and you're going to get a way better seat. So if you notice right when you walk in where those cherry pickers are, then you'll know where to spend your time. If you see the cherry pickers and they're on the far field, sorry folks, that sucks. It's way harder to watch practice when that's the case. They don't do it that often, but when they do, it really does suck. So if that's your day, sorry. But that's a reason you even more want to get higher on the berm if that happens. Is Jaron Reed a significant upgrade? I don't know. That's not a great answer. I think he's going to be. I think that Brandon Mebane, as much as we all know and love him, and the team loved him, and the players loved him, and he did his job, I think he's been fading a little bit, and he's up there in age. So you get a young player like Reed and someone who the team has had no hesitation in hyping him up. And this team does not hype people up necessarily the way they've hyped him up without a lot of confidence. I also think that run defenders are pretty easy to project. It's not like a wide receiver or even a quarterback. It's pretty easy to tell if a run defender is going to be good, and he's going to be. So I think the question to me is, is he ready to be the starter, or does someone like Silver Saliga, sorry, does he sneak in there as the starter? No one's talking about that. I think he could be. He was a starter for the Patriots, really strong run defender, and could be interesting up there. All right, folks. Any more quick questions before I call it a night and go start doing some of my own writing and research? Going once, going twice. Most anticipated game. For me, it's going to be game 1. It's going to be game in New Orleans because I'll be there, and it's going to be a game in New England because I'll be there for that. So, all right. Thanks, everybody. Seahawks season's about to get going again. Go Hawks.